Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Hashim Kumar. NATO's eastern flank is facing heightened tensions as Russian drones breached Polish airspace and fighter jets violated Estonia. On Tuesday, Estonia called a meeting of the North Atlantic Council under Article 4, allowing allies to consult when a member's territorial integrity or security is threatened. This is only the 9th time in NATO's 76-year history that article has been invoked. Joining us today is David DeBatto. He's a geopolitical analyst and former US Army Counterintelligence Agent. David, welcome to TVP World and thank you very much for taking the time.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, sir. So let's start with the incursions. I think most people would agree that that Russia is testing NATO's response to those incursions by drones and aircraft. But strategically speaking, what's Russia's game plan?
Well, their long-term game plan has been the same since the days of the Soviet Union. And that's not just to test and probe NATO's defenses, but to sow disunity, confusion, and to try to get the NATO members to act independently, to argue amongst themselves as to what type of response they're going to have to these incursions. It's nothing new. It's an old Soviet and now Russian playbook, but they really hope that the NATO members will turn against themselves and do much ado about nothing, which, although with some small exceptions, that's what they've been doing. They've been arguing about a united response. They're getting there, but they're certainly not there yet.
Right, okay. Well, as you say, getting there, we've had some fairly strong statements from the countries on the eastern flank of NATO. But President Trump has been somewhat skirting around the edges on this issue, hasn't he?
Yes, President Trump is skirting around the edges on this issue. He's been, unfortunately, skirting around the edges of the entire issue of the war with Ukraine. He has, as you know, not enacted any of the many sanctions that he's promised to level or levy against Russia. He keeps moving the dates, and so nothing has really happened. It's really hard to predict what President Trump will do about anything, but it appears as if he just refuses. He is not interested in being involved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So I don't see him making any definitive decisions in the very near future, whether this involves sanctions or actually aiding the defense of Ukraine or even NATO, to be honest.
Right, well, that's what I was coming to. So what happens the next time Russian aircraft or drones enter NATO airspace? I mean, Prime Minister Tusk of Poland, of course, amongst others, has said, well, they'll be shot down. Now, how does that kind of feed in to the NATO response as a whole?
Well, right now, as I said, and I think it's a really important point that needs to be stressed, there is no unified NATO response as a whole, and that's the issue. When Russia, again, probes NATO defenses, whether it's with armed drones, MiGs, hopefully not ballistic missiles or anything, I think it's going to, right now at least, be the individual NATO nations that respond. They are going to decide whether or not to shoot down the drones or the MiGs or whatever is violating their airspace. Right now, for the very near future, I don't see a unified NATO response to this, and this is very, very troubling and very, very dangerous.
And music to Putin's ear. I'd like to move on now to the area of hybrid warfare, cyber threats and so on. We've seen, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we've seen lots of hybrid attacks on the West, including, for example, arson attacks and cyber attacks. How does that fit in to Russia's strategy, and what is the way to respond to those as a NATO country?
Russia, by its own admission, has been at war with the West for at least 10 or 11 years. The West, meaning primarily NATO, doesn't acknowledge that. And in the way that Russia fights wars, it's a multi-dimensional war, meaning what you just said, hybrid warfare, whether it's arson, murders, cyber warfare, probing the defenses of the NATO nations, launching massive disinformation campaigns, taking down infrastructure. This is all part of the multidimensional warfare, the hybrid warfare that Russia has been employing for years. The problem, well, one of the many problems, is that NATO is not yet at least the elected officials, recognizing this as an actual war. They're looking at it as individual criminal acts, and that's a danger. This is not a law enforcement issue. This is not a series of criminal acts or just coincidences. This is all part of Russia's plan. Like I said, the multidimensional war. And NATO needs to, first of all, acknowledge that, admit that, and take very, very strong measures, actions, not words, actions against this. If there is an arson, for example, and there have been several, they need to catch the perpetrators, which they're pretty good at, and then they need to hold Russia accountable, directly accountable. And as far as other actions, like what you said, they've been issuing strong warnings and words against Russia. That's meaningless. Russia doesn't respond to strong words, hand-wringing and finger shaking, or calling their ambassador into holding account for Russian actions. They need to take actual actions, whether that's shooting down MiGs, drones, arresting Russian agents, and then holding them accountable, and not declaring war, but declaring that they're going to respond to what Russia has declared as a war and take appropriate long-term and strong action.
David, in the last minute or so that we have left, I'm going to ask you the big question. At which stage of this hybrid warfare does Article 5 of NATO's Charter get triggered? Does it have to be, a kinetic war? Should NATO be expanding its definition of the triggers for Article 5?
Unfortunately, Article 5, as is Article 4, very ambiguous. Each nation, each NATO nation, decides whether or not they want to activate this, to call for Article 5, whether they feel that the actions taken against their nation qualifies for an Article 5 violation. Again, that's part of the problem with the way that the Charter is set up, but that's the way it stands right now. There's no unified action for this. And in terms of your question, as far as when does this turn into a kinetic war, I don't think that's possible to answer. If we shoot down a MiG, does that mean we're in World War III? No. It probably means Russia's not going to send any MiGs over the border again. The same with drones. We're in a kinetic war. It's called Ukraine. And as soon as NATO recognizes that and responds appropriately, very strongly, it's going to get worse.
Well, the sooner NATO responds, the better. David DeBatto, unfortunately, we are going to have to end it there. But thank you, for coming along and sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure. You too.
Thank you. Bye now. Brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. But as always, lots more coming up. So don't go away. Bye.